The battlefield of Thermopylae, once a narrow mountain pass echoing with the clash of bronze and steel, fell into a haunting silence after the last of the 300 Spartans breathed their final breaths. For days the air hung heavy with the scent of blood and smoke, a grim reminder of the heroism and the tragedy that had unfolded. The very rocks of the pass seemed to mourn the loss of those legendary warriors who had held back the vast Persian army, men whose names would echo through history long after the dust settled. Back in Sparta, far from the distant roar of battle, news traveled slowly. Messengers, weary and anxious, navigated treacherous terrain, their hearts burdened with the knowledge of what they carried. The city-state, renowned for its stoicism and unyielding military discipline, faced a moment of collective grief, unlike any it had experienced in generations. Sparta had been raised on tales of valor, on the belief that the strength of the city lay in its warriors, and now the embodiment of that strength, the 300, had been extinguished. The silence in Sparta was not merely one of absence but of reflection and shock. Families waited in the barracks and homes, fearing the worst yet clinging to hope. Spartan culture, rigorous and disciplined as it was, had little room for the indulgence of fear, but even the most hardened soldiers and elders could not ignore the magnitude of this loss. Parents, wives, and children felt a grief that transcended words. Their sons, husbands, and fathers had fallen. On far from home, facing an overwhelming enemy with courage that bordered on myth. The city seemed to pause, as though the walls themselves absorbed the sorrow. In the streets, a rare stillness took hold. Unlike the rhythmic bustle of military drills or the clamor of trade, there was only a subdued hush. Citizens, young and old, gathered quietly at communal spaces, whispering prayers to the gods, offering sacrifices in hope that the fallen would be honored and remembered. Temples, once echoing with chants and rituals, now resonated with somber silence, broken only by the occasional clatter of armor from those preparing for the next inevitable challenge. Even the elders who had witnessed countless wars and campaigns spoke in hushed tones, aware that this battle was not just a defeat but a testament to Spartan dedication and the grim reality of war. The silence was mirrored on the battlefield itself. Thermopylae, now littered with weapons, shields, and the fallen, told a story that no messenger could fully convey. The mountains which had funneled the Persian army into the narrow pass stood as mute witnesses to the heroism of the 300. Each Spartan had fought with the discipline led into them since boyhood, forming the human bulwark that for days halted an empire's advance. Their bodies now rested among the broken stones and trampled earth, a stark contrast to the unstoppable tide of the Persian forces. Nature itself seemed to grieve, the winds whispering across the pass as if carrying the tales of courage and sacrifice to every corner of Greece. Yet this silence was purely mournful. It carried a deeper resonance, a kind of reverent awe. The Spartan people, though filled with sorrow, felt pride mingled with grief. The deeds of their soldiers were unparalleled in history, a small force standing against overwhelming odds, embodying the essence of Spartan discipline, honor, and courage. Parents recounted the legends to their children, emphasizing the moral songs of bravery, loyalty, and sacrifice. In Sparta, the memory of the 300 became a living lesson, a symbol of unwavering commitment to the state above all else. And the silence that followed was the pause before that legacy took root in the hearts of generations. Amidst the stillness, Spartan leaders began to contemplate the next steps. Silence in this context was strategic as much as it was mournful. Warriors and commanders alike understood that grief could not paralyze action. Plans for defense, reinforcement, and future campaigns were quietly but meticulously drawn. The city's military council, though heavy-hearted, deliberated with the knowledge that Thermopylae was not an end, but a prelude to a greater struggle. The 300 had fallen, yes, but their sacrifice demanded that Sparta endure, that their deaths be neither wasted nor forgotten. This quiet resolve would soon ripple across the city, turning sorrow into a resolute determination to honor the fallen through continued resistance and preparation. In these moments, the concept of silence itself became a powerful tool. It was a silence that reflected on the magnitude of the loss, mourned the courage of the fallen, and Gath. Arid strength for the challenges yet to come. The people of Sparta, steeped in centuries of martial tradition, found in this silence a way to process grief while steeling themselves for the trials ahead. Though Thermopylae had claimed the lives of their bravest, the spirit of the 300 lingered in every corner of the city, in every whisper of the wind, and in the hearts of those who remained. This as a silence filled not with emptiness but with meaning, the quiet before the storm of vengeance and honor that Sparta would unleash upon the Persian Empire. The news of the 300 Spartans' final stand did not arrive swiftly. In the ancient world, where messengers had to traverse mountains, rivers, and hostile lands, information moved at the speed of a man on foot or a horse. Thermopylae, a narrow pass far from the heart of the Peloponnesian Peninsula, was a world away from the fortified city of Sparta. Even the most experienced messengers could not anticipate the treacherous journey that lay before them, steep cliffs, dense forests, and the ever-present threat of Persian scouts. And yet, the city would eventually know the full scope of the tragedy, a moment that would forever shape Sparta. History. Sparta's military communication was as disciplined as its warriors. The ephors, the city's ruling magistrates, maintained strict protocols for receiving news from distant campaigns. When the first reports trickled in, they were vague, almost euphemistic. Words like engaged heavily or facing overwhelming numbers carried a weight that was only fully understood with the passage of Tim. Initial dispatches arrived via mounted runners, breathless and weary, carrying the uncertain tidings of battle. There was hope in these early reports. Perhaps the 300 had survived, perhaps reinforcements had arrived. But hope in Sparta was always tempered with realism, and realism demanded preparation for the worst. The messengers themselves bore the scars of the journey, dust-caked, sunburned, and exhausted. They brought letters sealed with the marks of commanders stationed along the pass. Their faces, however, spoke louder than the words on the scrolls. Families in the city, watching from the barracks and public squares, interpreted these expressions with a mixture of dread and foreboding. Mothers clutched their children. Soldiers adjusted their armor nervously, and elders whispered prayers to Ares, the god of war, and to Apollo, who watched over the fates of men. The first signs of sorrow began to ripple through the city, even before the grim truth was formally confirmed. It was the final messenger, a young helot who had been pressed into service for this dangerous task, who brought the definitive news. He arrived at the gates of Sparta, trembling from both exhaustion and fear. His horse had staggered through rocky trails, narrowly avoiding Persian patrols, and the boy himself had witnessed the devastation firsthand. With tears streaking his dirt-smeared face, he handed the ephors the scroll sealed with the mark of King Leonidas himself. The writing within was simple, precise, and horrifyingly direct. The 300 had fallen. Thermopylae had been overrun. Every man had died in defense of Greece. There was no hope for survivors. The reaction in Sparta was immediate and complex. Unlike other Greek city-states, whose grief might have manifested in wailing and open mourning, Sparta internalized its sorrow, adhering to centuries of tradition that demanded strength and stoicism. Yet even the most disciplined Spartans could not fully contain the shock. The ephors Gath, arid to deliberate, their expressions grave. Soldiers, who had trained alongside the fallen, clenched their fists and lowered their eyes. Mothers who had sent sons to war now whispered prayers that would never reach the ears of those young men. The city's very heartbeat seemed to slow as it absorbed the enormity of the loss. Word of the 300's annihilation spread through Sparta like wildfire. IED by runners, traders, and soldiers returning from the surrounding countryside. Each retelling was laced with both awe and sorrow. The citizens learned not only of the deaths, but also of the valor displayed by the warriors. stories emerged of how the Spartans had held the pass against impossible odds, refusing to retreat even when surrounded. Tales of their disciplined formations, their unyielding shields, and their final charge against the Persian horde circulated quickly. The message was clear: these men had died not in vain, but as living symbols of Spartan courage and dedication to the city's state. Public rituals soon followed, designed to honor the fallen and to channel collective grief into action. Temples rang with solemn prayers, and sacrifices were offered to the gods for the souls of the departed. But beyond the spiritual acts, Sparta's response was strategic. Military councils convened immediately to assess the vulnerability left by the loss of the 300. New plans were drawn to reinforce remaining forces, secure critical passes, and prepare for the next Persian advance. The ephors understood that the city's survival depended not solely on mourning, but on decisive action. The news of annihilation, while heart-wrenching, became a catalyst for Spartan resilience and the mobilization of the entire state. The psychological impact of the messenger's arrival was profound. The Spartans, trained from childhood in the art of war, were accustomed to loss, but the sacrifice of 300 elite warriors brought the concept of death into sharp focus. Soldiers who had looked up to Leonidas and his men as the epitome of martial perfection now faced the sobering reality that even the strongest could fall. This realization did not weaken them; it strengthened the resolve of the living. Sparta was not a city that mourned indefinitely. It was a city that acted, transforming grief into discipline, sorrow into vigilance, and remembrance into a promise of retaliation in the days that followed. The city's infrastructure itself became a testament to both grief and preparation. Barracks echoed with the training of new recruits, and armories were stocked with weapons for campaigns yet to come. Families who had once whispered their fears aloud now channeled their anxiety into support for the state, understanding that their collective effort could honor the fallen by ensuring Sparta would endure. The memory of the 300 became embedded not only in stories and prayers, but in every tangible aspect of Spartan life, from the shields hung in the halls to the drills conducted in the training yards. Ultimately, the arrival of news about the annihilation of the 300 Spartans marked a turning point for the city. It was a moment of profound grief, but also a moment that crystallized the Spartan spirit. The citizens understood that Thermopylae was more than a battlefield. It was a moral crucible, testing the values of courage, loyalty, and sacrifice. And in learning of the fate of their bravest sons, Sparta did not collapse under the weight of loss. Instead, it rose to meet the future with renewed determination. The silence that had followed the battle in the mountains was mirrored by the resolve that now coursed through the city. A resolve that would shape the destiny of Greece and etch the names of the 300 into eternity. The fall of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae left a wound in the heart of Sparta that would never fully heal. Their sacrifice was felt not only in the streets and homes of the city, but also in the halls of power, where the ephors, generals, and citizens alike recognized the need to transform grief into action. In the days following the arrival of the grim news, a solemn city-wide oath took shape, a vow that would define the spirit of Sparta and echo through generations. It was not merely a pledge of revenge against the Persians, it was a covenant to honor the fallen by ensuring that their courage would forge the future of the city-state. The oath began in the presence of the ephors, Sparta's governing magistrates, who convened an emergency council with the city's military leaders. King Leonidas's death had left a symbolic and practical void in the Spartan hierarchy, but the council understood that leadership must rise from collective resolve. The words of the oath were first spoken by the senior ephor, a man whose own son had been among the 300, lending both authority and personal weight to his declaration. He stood in the central hall, surrounded by soldiers, citizens, and priests, and his voice echoed with solemnity. "We swear upon the graves of our fallen that Sparta shall not falter. Their courage shall be our guide. Their death shall be our oath." The citizens responded in unison, their voices filling the hall, vibrant, with a mixture of sorrow, pride, and determination. This was not a ritual of empty words, it was a binding commitment, a moral contract between the living and the dead. In Spartan culture, where discipline, honor, and loyalty were paramount, breaking such an oath was unthinkable. Each soldier, each citizen, understood that the legacy of the 300 rested upon their shoulders. The oath transformed grief into purpose, ensuring that the memory of Thermopylae would not be a static monument, but a living force guiding the actions of Sparta. Outside the council halls, the oath was mirrored in public ceremonies. Temples to Ares, the god of war, and Artemis Orthia, protector of young warriors, became the stage for collective mourning and reaffirmation. Priests led rituals in which citizens offered sacrifices and recited prayers, invoking the spirits of the fallen to witness the commitment of the living. Families who had lost sons, husbands, or fathers placed tokens on altars, shields, spears, and cloaks, symbolizing the continued presence of their loved ones in the life of the city. In every gesture, Sparta wove grief into duty, personal loss into civic responsibility. The oath was not confined to words, it was inscribed in action. The military component of the oath was immediate. Sparta's remaining forces, though not yet engaged with the full Persian army, began rigorous training to ensure readiness for the next encounter. Drills became more intense, strategy sessions more meticulous, and the production of weapons and armor accelerated. The council mandated that every soldier, from veteran hoplite to the newest recruit, embody the courage and discipline of the fallen 300. Each day's training concluded with a ritual reminder of the oath, a moment of silence, a shared look toward the mountains where Thermopylae lay, and a reaffirmation that the deaths of the 300 would guide every Spartan action until the Persian threat was extinguished. The oath also took on a social dimension. Sparta was a tightly knit society in which every citizen was a soldier, and every citizen's honor was intertwined with the state. Parents taught their children about the bravery of the 300, ensuring that the oath lived in the hearts of the next generation. Mothers recounted the final stand, emphasizing duty and courage over fear and despair. Fathers instructed their sons in combat drills with renewed intensity, reminding them that they were training not merely for survival, but to uphold the sacred promise made over the bodies of their predecessors. Even the helots, the state's subjugated population who supported Sparta's military machine, were drawn into this moral framework, understanding that the city's survival depended on collective vigilance and discipline. The language of the oath was also philosophical. It emphasized values beyond revenge. The Spartans did not vow mere slaughter of the Persian forces. They vowed to preserve the integrity of their city, to uphold the principles of courage, self-sacrifice, and loyalty, and to ensure that Sparta remained a beacon of martial excellence. This elevated the oath from a tactical response to a moral imperative. Every decision in Sparta's political, military, and cultural life was now measured against the standards set by the 300. Their discipline and courage became benchmarks, their sacrifice a moral compass. In effect, the oath transformed Thermopylae into the soul of Sparta, a spiritual and ethical guidepost for all who followed. King Leonidas himself became a symbol intertwined with the oath. Though dead, his presence lingered in speeches, rituals, and the hearts of every Spartan soldier. The memory of his leadership at Thermopylae served as a rallying point, reminding the living that courage required steadfastness even in the face of inevitable death. His actions, immortalized in songs and recitations, reinforced the moral weight of the oath. Sparta would honor its fallen not with tears alone, but with unwavering commitment to the ideals they had fought to defend. Perhaps most importantly, the oath created unity in the face of despair. Grief, though profound, could have fractured Sparta, leaving it vulnerable to further Persian incursions. Instead, the oath channeled sorrow into collective purpose. Citizens who might have questioned the wisdom of continued resistance now found meaning in their shared promise. Soldiers who had witnessed the destruction of their comrades were given a path to honor them, a path defined by action, preparation, and the defense of the city. Through this oath, Sparta transformed loss into resolve, sorrow into strategy, and tragedy into legacy. In the years that followed, the oath remained a guiding principle in Spartan culture. It was recited at training grounds, in council halls, and during religious ceremonies, always reminding citizens of their sacred duty. New generations of warriors grew up understanding that Thermopylae was more than a battle, it was a moral touchstone, a test of character and commitment. And while the Persian threat would continue to loom, the Oath of Sparta ensured that every Spartan, living and future, carried with them the memory and the moral weight of the 300. In essence, the oath sworn over the fallen was more than a pledge. It was a covenant that intertwined death with duty, grief with honor, and memory with action. Sparta had faced its darkest hour, but through this solemn vow, it reaffirmed the values that made it legendary. The 300 had died to protect the pass, but the city itself would now live to protect their legacy, turning a battlefield defeat into a spiritual and cultural triumph that would endure through the ages. News of the heroic last stand at Thermopylae traveled far beyond Sparta's stone walls, spreading across the fragmented Greek city-states like wildfire. Athens, Corinth, Thebes, and the smaller polis, normally consumed by rivalries, politics, and trade, paused as the tale reached them. The 300 Spartans, a handful of men against the overwhelming might of Persia, had held a pass that even the greatest Greek armies could scarcely have defended. Their deaths were both a tragedy and a symbol of hope. If a small band of disciplined warriors could resist an empire, what might united Greece accomplish? The city-states watched, listened, and wondered what Sparta, ever the militaristic powerhouse, would do next. Within Sparta, preparations for retaliation were swift and unrelenting. While grief and mourning had initially filled the city, the ephors and military leaders channeled these emotions into action. Every citizen who could bear arms was summoned, every shield polished, every spear sharpened, and every strategy reconsidered. Sparta's renowned discipline, forged over centuries of rigorous training and unwavering adherence to military law, became the backbone of this preparation. The fallen 300 were not forgotten. They were the standard by which the remaining soldiers measured themselves, their courage a constant reminder that failure was unacceptable. The Greek world took notice of these movements with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Sparta's preparations were visible even from afar, as messengers carried the news of mustering troops, stockpiling weapons, and reinforcing key defensive positions. Allied city-states observed carefully, some offering cautious support, others watching skeptically. Sparta's reputation was unparalleled. It was a city where discipline and military might were inseparable from civic identity. Yet the destruction of the 300 had raised a new question. Could Sparta, inspired by vengeance and honor, turn grief into a weapon against the Persians? Across Greece, eyes turned toward the Peloponnesian heartland with anticipation, understanding that what unfolded next could alter the course of history. The psychological impact of the Spartan response cannot be overstated. Sparta's military culture ensured that preparation was always methodical. But after Thermopylae, there was an added intensity, a focus fueled by righteous anger and solemn duty. Training routines, once demanding, now became punishing. Young recruits were tested beyond endurance, learning the precise formations, maneuvers, and strategies that had defined the 300. Veteran soldiers, those who had not been at Thermopylae but who understood the gravity of the loss, drilled relentlessly, refining the phalanx and perfecting their spear techniques. Each day in Sparta became a crucible, each night a period of reflection and recommitment to the oath sworn over the fallen. This vigilance and preparation did not escape the Persians, who, through scouts and informants, learned of the Spartans' movements. King Xerxes, confident in the sheer size of his army, initially wed the news with mild irritation rather than fear. Yet as reports of Spartan organization, discipline, and readiness spread, even the Persian commanders began to sense the danger of underestimating a people driven not merely by strategy, but by honor and vengeance. Sparta's response was not just military, it was psychological warfare, sending a message that the deaths at Thermopylae would not mar The end of resistance, but the beginning of a calculated, relentless counterstrike. The wider Greek world began to grasp the stakes. Sparta's neighbors realized that the small city-state, though militarily powerful, was surrounded by states often more concerned with politics than war. Athens, in particular, faced a dilemma. Its fleets and walls were formidable, yet it had not been present at the Thermopylae. Could it trust Sparta's vengeance to shield all of Greece from Persian expansion? Corinth and Thebes debated their roles, weighing support against fear of Persian reprisal. Even distant city-states, often insulated from the immediate threat, recognized the symbolic power of the 300 and the importance of Spartan preparation. The battle had transcended geography, becoming a matter of Greek honor, unity, and survival. Within Sparta, preparations took on ceremonial significance. The city-state society, steeped in ritual, transformed military readiness into a form of devotion to the fallen. Sacrificial rites at temples, oaths reaffirmed in public gatherings, and the veneration of armor and weaponry all combined to create a spiritual and moral context for the coming conflict. Every drill, every assembly, every council meeting carried the weight of responsibility. The 300 had given their lives, and the living were charged with ensuring that such sacrifice would not be meaningless. The moral imperative intertwined with tactical readiness, creating a society prepared to act with both precision and resolve. Perhaps the most striking element of Sparta's preparation was the unity it inspired. Greek city-states, normally fractured by internal rivalries, began to see a shared purpose. The valor of the 300 became a rallying cry, reminding all Greeks that courage and discipline could counter even the mightiest empire. Messengers from Sparta reached allied cities with news of reinforcements, coordinated defenses, and strategic planning. While Sparta's reputation often intimidated neighbors, the story of Thermopylae inspired collaboration. Leaders across Greece began to understand that the coming confrontation with Persia was not merely a Spartan matter, it was a Hellenic one. This period of watchful anticipation was as much about shaping morale as it was about shaping armies. Citizens of city-states across Greece followed the reports, recounting the bravery of the Phalanx, speculating on Spartan strategy and preparing psychologically for the larger conflict to come. Children learned the names of the 300 as part of their education. Warriors repeated their stories during training, and philosophers debated the moral lessons of courage and sacrifice. Across the Greek world, the memory of Thermopylae and the preparation of Sparta became intertwined, creating a culture and strategic narrative that bound the region together in common purpose. Ultimately, Sparta's preparation was a testament to the city-state's ability to transform tragedy into strength. The death of the 300th, far from demoralizing the city, became the spark that ignited a nation's resolve. Greece watched as Sparta mobilized with extraordinary discipline and strategic foresight, signaling that the battle for Thermopylae was only the beginning. Across mountains, valleys, and cities, the Greeks understood that the coming struggle was not simply about territory or power. It was about honor, legacy, and the unbreakable will of a people united by grief and vengeance. The world had witnessed the courage of 300, and now it would see what the living could achieve in their name, the slaughter of 300 Spartans at Thermopylae was in many ways a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. Yet even in death, those warriors had ignited a spark that would reshape the course of history. Their final stand was not the conclusion of resistance, it was the prologue to a far greater struggle that would define Greece and the Western world for generations. While the Persian army marched triumphantly through the mountain pass, Sparta and the rest of Greece began to awaken to the larger implications of courage, sacrifice, and unity, the very forces that would ultimately turn the tide of the war. The immediate aftermath of Thermopylae revealed the harsh reality of Spartan loss. The city-state had suffered its elite warriors, the symbol of its military prowess, and a blow to morale that could have been crippling. Yet the surviving Spartan forces and their allies refused to yield to despair. The ephors, generals, and citizens understood that Thermopylae had demonstrated both the power and limits of resistance. The 300 had held the Persian army for days, and even in defeat they had inflicted strategic damage and bought precious time. Their death, though tragic, became the impetus for an unprecedented mobilization across Greece. This mobilization began with Sparta itself, the city-state, whose every citizen was trained for war from childhood, transformed grief into determination. Soldiers drilled harder than ever before, recalling the disciplined formations of the 300 as both inspiration and blueprint. New recruits underwent rigorous exercises designed to test not just strength and endurance, but the mental fortitude to face overwhelming odds. Leaders implemented strategies that accounted for the lessons of Thermopylae, focusing on defensive positions, coordination with lies, and the psychological resilience necessary to confront a vast invading army. Every spear sharpened, every shield reinforced, and every formation perfected was a testament to the oath sworn over the fallen. Beyond Sparta, Thermopylae had ignited a spark across all of Greece. City-states that had previously been divided by rivalry and political disputes now faced a common threat, one that demanded unity or total subjugation. Athens, Corinth, and Thebes, among others, recognized that the Persian advance could not be stopped by a single city-state, no matter how disciplined. The courage of the 300 became a symbol of collective responsibility, inspiring leaders and citizens alike to set aside petty conflicts and contribute to a larger effort. This emerging Greek solidarity, born from tragedy, would become the backbone of the resistance against Persia. The death of the 300 also had profound psychological effects on both Greeks and Persians. Within Greece, the story of their valor spread quickly, turning soldiers, citizens, and even distant communities into believers in the power of human courage. Poems, songs, and oral tales celebrated the discipline and bravery of the fallen Spartans, embedding their actions into the collective memory of the Greek world. For the Persians, however, Thermopylae revealed that numerical superiority alone was insufficient to break the spirit of determined warriors. The Persian commanders began to recognize that defeating Greece would require more than sheer force. It would demand strategy, patience, and caution in the face of an opponent whose courage could not be measured by numbers alone. Strategically, the death of the 300 forced both sides to adapt. Persia advanced through Greece but could not underestimate the ingenuity of its defenders. Sparta and its allies fortified key passes, established naval blockades, and coordinated defense plans that leveraged their knowledge of local terrain. Thermopylae had shown that even a small, disciplined force could delay an empire's advance, and the Greeks applied this lesson in subsequent battles. The famous stand at Thermopylae, though a tactical defeat, became a strategic blueprint, sacrificed time and men in carefully chosen positions to maximize the enemy's cost, morale, and momentum. The moral implications of the 300 feet sacrifice also resh. 8. The ethos of Greek resistance. The Spartans had fought and died not for personal gain, not for wealth or territory, but for honor, loyalty, and the preservation of their city-state. This moral framework became a guiding principle for all of Greece. Soldiers understood that courage could inspire entire nations, that discipline could overcome overwhelming odds, and that even in death, heroism fuel the living. Thermopylae became more than a battlefield. It became a symbol of what Greece itself could aspire to: unity, courage, and resistance against tyranny. The legacy of the 300th also influenced Sparta's allies in subtle but profound ways. Athens, which would soon face the Persian navy at Salamis, drew strength from the knowledge that Spartan soldiers had already faced the mightiest Persian forces head-on. Corinth and other city-states, initially hesitant to commit forces, recognized that the stakes were existential. If Sparta could fall, Greece itself was in jeopardy. The sacrifice of Thermopylae became a rallying cry for collective action, binding the Greek city-states together in a shared mission that transcended individual pride and rivalry. Perhaps most importantly, the death of the 300 demonstrated that resistance was not measured by survival alone, but by the impact one left behind. Thermopylae bought critical time for Greek forces to regroup, fortify, and prepare for future engagements. It allowed naval forces to position themselves strategically and for city-states to unify under a common purpose. The 300 had perished physically, but their influence reverberated through every maneuver, every alliance, and every battle that followed. Their deaths were the first act in a drama whose second act would see Greek ingenuity and courage triumph against overwhelming odds. In essence, the end of Thermopylae was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a larger narrative. The 300 had fallen, but their legacy inspired Greece to fight not just for survival, but for identity, freedom, and honor. Each Spartan death became a moral lesson, a strategic advantage, and a rallying point. Across the mountains, plains, and city-states of Greece, the memory of Thermopylae infused every soldier, every leader, and every citizen with a renewed sense of purpose. The Persian advance might have seemed unstoppable, but the spirit of resistance had been ignited, and it would not be extinguished. Ultimately, the death of the 300 was only the beginning, because it transformed despair into action, grief into strategy, and tragedy into legend. Thermopylae became a symbol of courage against insurmountable odds, a testament to the power of discipline and honor, and a moral compass for a people facing the mightiest empire the world had ever seen. The stand of the 300 Spartans ensured that history would not remember them simply as men who died, but as men who inspired an entire civilization to rise, resist, and ultimately prevail. Their sacrifice was a spark, and from that spark, the flame of Greek resistance would burn ever brighter, shaping the destiny of a continent for centuries to come.